Let's talk about Squarespace. That's right, we have a sponsor now, and that sponsor is Squarespace. And right now, Squarespace is partnering with TYT, our parent network, and they are gonna be offering up a 10% discount of your first trial. Squarespace is an awesome website where you can design your very own personalized websites for whatever you're working on in your life. I have some personal experience with the website. That is, my girlfriend, I guess now fiance, has a blog that she documents our own travels, our life together, and it's called Have Dog Will Drive. It's wonderful, and she created it with the help of Squarespace. Before this sponsorship even occurred, she just knew that it was the place to go to create a website that was simple and user-friendly and has gotten her some readers from all over the world. So check out her blog, Have Dog Will Drive, and also head over to squarespace.com/TYT for that 10% discount. I can't wait to see what you guys are working on. Welcome back to Murder with Friends. Today we're talking about the North Hollywood shootout, sometimes called the attack on North Hollywood. And where you're picking up with us, we are going to be breaking down how this attack happened. And it does come down to a question of firepower. Reminds me again of the quote I said in part 1 about the police officer saying I was in the wrong place with the wrong gun. So Amir, what are we talking about with this firepower, the difference in firepower?
Yeah, there's a huge disparity between what the robbers were packing versus what the first responding officers had, which at that time, most police officers, they relied on a .38 caliber revolver or 9mm handguns, which when you compare those to what the other guys had, it's apples and oranges.
They were completely unmatched.
Yeah, it's like a BB gun versus a real gun.
Right. And just to illustrate that point a little bit further, we have a video element, again narrated by our friend Anna, telling us about the absolute, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not difference. I need something stronger than difference.
Disparity?
Sure, between gun power, firepower, the North Hollywood shootout. Let's take a look at this.
So how did 2 disorganized bank robbers require a response of more than 300 police officers? To put it simply, firepower. From the beginning, officers were outmatched, firing pistols and revolvers against a Bushmaster, an AK-47, and an HK-91 rifle with high-capacity drum magazines. Police bullets seemed to bounce off the robbers, who were decked out in heavy-plated body armor. By the time the smoke cleared, the criminals had fired twice the rounds to that of law enforcement.
And the numbers on this, sometimes you'll see north of like 3,000 rounds, sometimes you'll see like 250,000 rounds that were fired. A good example of this was in the 3 minutes that Larry stepped outside and had this first gun battle with law enforcement outside. In 3 minutes, he fired 300 rounds. So what sort of guns was he using that he was able to do that?
Yeah, so one of the main ones that he was using is a Chinese variant of the AK-47. And basically, just to talk about bullets alone, on the far left end is what police officers were mainly dealing with. That's the .38 on the far left, the 9mm. Now compare that with the 7.62 by 39mm bullet and above. Those were the caliber of guns and bullets that the robbers were using. So there's a huge difference there, not only in just the shape of the bullet itself, but how much gunpowder is going into that and the gun itself. The ones that the robbers were using will go through almost anything. In fact, they used those guns specifically because it would open the vault doors on the banks, which at that time, 9mm bullets would bounce off of it, but these higher caliber bullets, the vaults weren't made for that.
Well, the bullets they used even pierced a patrol car, because there's a story of a civilian who was outside getting cover, ducking down under a patrol car, and they shot a bullet and it went through the lower end of the patrol car and into a civilian's back and then the other civilian's knee.
These are weapons of war. They're meant to cause as much damage as you possibly can.
And what was the climate for weaponry in the US at the time?
Well, so we had just come off from the Gulf War. So that's a big thing to always consider in the early 90s is you have a ton of military surplus. So you have all this weaponry and you have all this technology that weapons manufacturers have come up with, and now there's no longer a war. They still need to increase their production. There's like the whole wartime business that they now need to transfer to a civilian population. So you have all these assault weapons in circulation. It's easier to get these things, and they invariably end up in the hands of robbers like this.
But how did that also coincide with the assault weapons ban?
So the assault weapons ban in 1994 happened, and when something like that happens, you end up having a whole population of people now all of a sudden wanting these guns more than ever because they think that they can't have it. You see it today too.
Right.
Whenever a mass shooting happens, people go out and they start buying a ton of guns. The same thing was happening back then. You have gun shows and different types of loopholes that people will start using to get their hands on these kinds of weapons.
So the police were outgunned,
Right.
but where a lot of people felt that they had done right was in the police maneuvering, which you can see.
Tactics, yeah.
Yeah, the police tactics that immediately sort of kicked into place, and the placement of different police officers was absolutely instrumental in making sure that these bank robbers didn't get that much farther than really the parking lot of the Bank of America
Right.
in North Hollywood. So if we're gonna talk about what went wrong, and that was absolutely the access that these guys had to this insane arsenal that they had already been arrested for years prior.
Yeah.
But what the police did right was in how they improvised, knowing that they were at a disadvantage, how they were able to get the place surrounded and to contain these bank robbers is something to be applauded.
Right, and you look at these illustrations after the fact of how the police surrounded it, and I mean, when you look at those numbers and just there's police cars all around the block. It's kind of amazing how they're able to mobilize so quickly, given the circumstances. And no amount of firepower can beat that at the end of the day. And I think the two robbers, they realize that.
Yeah.
Like this is they're way in over their head. They could have rocket launchers and they're still gonna be dead.
Yeah, and while you hear the people that were there, it felt like it was going on forever. Think about it. SWAT team was there within 18 minutes.
That's crazy. Can you even think like there's a bank robbery going on, 18 minutes later you have an entire SWAT team there?
But then that also raises the question, Amir, is that they had their watches set, remember, for 8 minutes, because in the bank robberies prior, they had timed it to about the LAPD response time would be 8 minutes that they could rob a bank and be in and out. Had that patrol car not just been patrolling, maybe they would have gotten away with it.
Right.
Another thing I do want to bring up too that we touched on in part one is their armor, because this is their armor. It's so much more than a Kevlar vest. They had made adjustments to bulletproof vests and metal plating on their shins. Well, at least Larry did. This is another sort of like shitty team, and like Larry is a shitty guy because Emil didn't have any coverage on his legs, and that if I was robbing a bank with you, say, and I noticed that you had metal plating and Kevlar all over your body, on your legs included, I would probably raise my hand and be like, hey, do you have some of that for me? Seems like could be important.
You should never skip leg day.
What is your response when you read that they had to go to pawn shops and gun stores to arm themselves, that law enforcement
That's
had
something
to do that?
straight out of a movie to me, that the situation is so intense and so dire that you need to go to a gun store and be like, yo, like we're taking these rifles, we're about to have a shootout. I think these type of things like only happened in like the Wild West, when like a raid of bandits came into the town and like the sheriffs had to like go into the general store and take the guns to like arm themselves to fight against the.
Would you agree that the police won because of strategy, where the robbers had the upper hand because of firepower?
Strategy is part of it, but it's manpower. Like there was no way they were getting out of this one. Like too many things had gone wrong at that point. Starting from the beginning, like you said, if those two cops weren't on patrol there, they could have gotten away from this, but that screwed up their entire plan from the start. And there was no way out at that point.
And what do you think about?
You're gonna run out of ammunition at some point, but they're not gonna run out of more policemen.
Right. What do you think about them having access to as many guns as they had, given their prior convictions?
Well, first of all, they shouldn't have even been able to get those guns because they were both convicted felons. So they shouldn't have been able to get them. But dude, this is America. It's easy to get guns now. Just imagine how easy it was to get them back in the 90s. And they did, and they got any kind of modification that they wanted. And it's so easy to illegally modify assault weapons to make them fully automatic, which they did.
Yeah, that's important too, and that's something that I'm so unfamiliar with guns. That the idea of modifying a gun, I just think that like a gun comes as a gun, and that's the end of it. That's your gun. And so to hear that they had made these modifications to make it more damaging.
There's a certain innocence about the police during this time. The fact no, but like this is like let me explain. Like,
yeah, do
This was like the LAPD of the early 90s and the 80s before that. The ones that would come up and they would still have revolvers and stuff. The kinds that you see in old action movies where they show up and they just have a revolver. And it's like this old school cop kind of imagery that you have in your head. After this is when you start seeing the militarized police that have Glocks and like all this different kind of firepower. But even like the police cars that you see back then, when I see videos of it, you have those boxy police cars that just seemed kind of novel to me. And then this changed all of it. This put guns and like the level of technology we have for weapons right in everyone's face.
Yeah, well,
and that innocence was lost.
I'm hesitant to agree with you on the word choice of innocence when it comes to Los Angeles police in the early 90s.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I'm probably gonna get a lot of shit for saying that. I'm not articulating it right, but you don't see that kind of police anymore. If that makes sense. Just like police with revolvers just seems silly to me now. Like, why would a police officer have a revolver anymore?
Where I will agree with you is that the North Hollywood shootout absolutely changed the landscape and the armament of police and also of media coverage. And that brings us into our part 3. So stay with us because in part 3, we're gonna talk about what changed from the North Hollywood shootout, the impacts of this event that you still see today. Stay with us.